There's a person on your mind right now. You didn't even have to think about who I mean. The name or the face arrived before you finished reading that sentence, before you made a single conscious decision to recall them. They simply appeared, the way they always do, in the quiet spaces, in the unguarded moments, in the seconds between one thought and the next when your defenses are down and the truth of how much they mattered to you surfaces without permission. And the fact that they still appear that quickly, the fact that after all this time, after all the prayers you've prayed and all the distance you put between yourself and the memory of them, the fact that they can still arrive that fast in your mind tells you something you've been trying not to admit. You are not over it. Not fully. Not in the deepest place. And today, right now, I want you to know that you do not have to pretend otherwise. Not here. Not in this space. Because what I am about to share with you is not a message about moving on faster or being stronger or deciding to be fine. Those messages exist. They have their place. But this is not that. This is something different. This is a message about meaning. Because there is a difference, a profound, life-changing, theologically grounded difference between a heartbreak that was simply a painful accident and a heartbreak that was allowed by God for a purpose that your natural mind cannot yet fully comprehend. And I believe, with everything in me, that what you went through with that person was the second kind. Not random, not meaningless, not a cosmic mistake that slipped through God's fingers while he was looking somewhere else, but a specifically, carefully, divinely permitted breaking. One that was designed, in the hands of a God who wastes nothing, to produce something in you that could not have been produced any other way. Stay with me, because what comes next is going to take you somewhere you have needed to go for a very long time. Validating the invisible. Before I tell you why God allowed it, I need to sit with you in the reality of what it actually felt like. Because too many spiritual messages skip this part. They rush to the lesson without first honoring the wound. And a wound that has not been fully honored cannot be fully healed. So let me honor it. Let me describe what the breaking actually felt like. And I want you to tell me, not out loud, but in your spirit, whether any of this is true for your story. There was a before and an after. That is perhaps the most honest way to describe it. Your life, your internal life, the life that lives beneath the surface of your daily routine, divided itself into two distinct eras. The time before that person and the time after. And the passage from one to the other was not gradual. It was not a slow fading. It was a moment, a conversation, or a silence, or a realization, or a discovery that broke something so cleanly and so completely that you could feel the exact place where it happened. And the pain of it was not just emotional. It was physical. You felt it in your body in a way that surprised you because you had not known before this that emotional pain could be that embodied, that concrete, that impossible to separate from the physical experience of being alive. You stopped eating properly, or you ate too much. You stopped sleeping, or you slept too long and still woke exhausted. You went through entire days performing normalcy, answering emails, cooking meals, nodding through conversations, while internally you were somewhere else entirely, sitting in the ruins of something you had believed in deeply. Try to understand how you had misread it so completely. And the questions, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? Was I not enough? Was I too much? Did I miss the signs? Did I cause this? Did I choose this? Did God warn me and I refused to listen? Did I pray wrong? Did I love wrong? Did I give too much or not enough or in the wrong way or to the wrong person entirely? And beneath all of those questions, beneath all of the analysis and the replaying and the second guessing, the deepest question, the one you could barely bring yourself to fully form, because forming it felt dangerous. God, where were you? Pause for a moment. Take a breath. I want to answer that question today. Fully. Honestly. Without the kind of spiritual platitudes that sound right, but don't actually reach the place where the pain lives. Where was God? He was there. He was there in every moment of it. Not as a passive observer. Not as a distant administrator of events he could not control. But as the one who, in his sovereign, incomprehensible, love-driven wisdom, looked at your life and at the path ahead of you, and at the person you were becoming, and at the person you still needed to become, and made a decision. He allowed the breaking. Not because he is cruel, not because he was punishing you, not because you were not prayed up enough or faithful enough or loved enough by heaven, but because he could see what you could not see. And what he saw made the breaking not just permissible, but necessary. Let me show you why. The core reframe. I want to establish something before we go into the specific reasons, because everything that follows rests on this foundation. And if you don't receive this foundation, the rest of the message will not land the way it is meant to. God does not cause pain, but he permits it. And there is a distinction between those two things that matters enormously. A God who causes pain is a God to be feared in the wrong way. A God whose love is conditional, whose affection is unreliable, whose hand in your life is as likely to wound as to heal. That is not the God of Scripture. That is not the God who knows the number of hairs on your head, who catches every tear in a bottle, who calls you by name and says you are precious and honored in his sight. But a God who permits pain, a God who loves you enough to allow the things that will ultimately produce what love requires. That is the God of every story in Scripture that we call a testimony, because every testimony begins with a trial. Every resurrection begins with a death. Every garden of new growth begins with a winter that looked, for a season, like the end of everything. Romans 8 verse 28. And hear this not as a cliche you have heard 100 times, but as a living, specific, personal promise spoken over the exact situation you have been carrying. Says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. All things, not some things, not the easy things, not the things that made sense at the time. All things, including the thing that broke you, including the person who left, or who stayed too long, or who you had to leave, or who chose someone else, or who revealed themselves to be something entirely different for what you believed them to be. All of it, every jagged, senseless, devastating piece of it, is in the hands of a God who is actively, intentionally, sovereignly working it for your good. Not your comfort, your good. And sometimes those are very different things. Now, let me show you the specific ways he was working. There are 7 reasons, and I'm going to give you all 7. Don't go anywhere. The 7 reasons. Reason 1, that person was showing you who you had become, not who you were meant to be. Listen closely to what comes next, because this first reason is one that takes courage to receive. Every significant relationship in our lives functions, in part, as a mirror. The people we choose, the ones we invest in, give our hearts to, build our lives around, reflect something about us, about our self-perception, about what we believe we deserve, about the version of ourselves we are currently operating from. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the person who broke your heart was, in part, a reflection of a version of yourself that God needed to bring to an end. I want to be careful here, because I'm not saying that the pain was your fault. I am not saying that you invited mistreatment by being a certain kind of person. Abuse and betrayal and abandonment are never the fault of the person who receives them. That is not what I am saying. What I'm saying is something different, something more interior. Something about the internal landscape you were living in when that relationship took root. For many of you, and I want you to sit with this honestly, the relationship that broke you began during a season when your self-worth was not fully intact. When you were operating from a version of yourself that had been shaped by earlier wounds. A childhood that left you hungry for a particular kind of love or validation. A previous relationship that damaged your sense of what you deserved. A long season of loneliness that made the presence of this person feel like an answered prayer when it was, in fact, something more complicated. And you accepted things from that person that the woman God is building you into would not accept. You minimized things that should have been addressed. You tolerated a quality of love that was less than what you were created for. Not because you were foolish, but because some part of you had been convinced somewhere along the way that less was what you deserved. And God, who sees not just who you are, but who He always intended you to be, looked at the trajectory of that relationship and saw something you couldn't see yet. He saw that if it continued, it would not elevate you into the fullness of your identity. It would continue to confirm the diminished story you have been living from. And so He allowed the breaking. Not as punishment for your lowered self-worth, but as intervention, as the surgical removal of something that, left in place, would have kept you small indefinitely. Think about the woman you were when that relationship was at its height. Think about how you spoke about yourself, how you allowed yourself to be treated, what you tolerated in silence, what you talked yourself out of addressing, what you dismissed in yourself to keep the peace. Now think about the woman you are today. Is there a difference? For most of you, if you're honest, the answer is yes. The breaking, as devastating as it was, began a process of excavation, of returning to yourself, of slowly, painfully, and then with increasing momentum, rebuilding a sense of your own worth that is no longer dependent on whether a particular person chooses you. The heartbreak did not diminish you. It revealed you. It stripped away a version of yourself that was built on the wrong foundation and began the work of building you on a foundation that will not move. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." The plan was always the fullness. The breaking was the path. Reason 2, that person was an assignment, and the assignment was complete. Pause for a moment. Take a breath. Not every person who enters your life is meant to stay for all of it. Some people are assigned to a season, and the end of the season is not a failure. It is a completion. This is one of the most difficult truths to hold in the context of heartbreak, because our hearts do not naturally think in seasons. Our hearts think in forevers. We invest deeply, we build, we commit, we weave our lives into the fabric of another person's life, and we expect permanence. We were designed for it. God placed a longing for lasting love in every human heart. And when something we believed was permanent turns out to be seasonal, the grief is real and it is profound. But here is what I want you to consider. What did that person give you during the season they were present? I want you to think about this specifically, not about the ending, not about the pain, but about the season itself, about what arrived in your life through the presence of that person that would not have arrived any other way. For some of you, they gave you courage you didn't know you had, a relationship that pushed you to try things, go places, become things that you would not have attempted without the encouragement of their presence in your life. And even though they are gone, the courage remained. It became yours. It is still operating in you today. For some of you, they gave you children, or a home, or a community, or a faith that was shaken loose from its formal, inherited, untested shape and forced into something more personal, more honest, more genuinely yours because of the questions their absence made you ask. For some of you, they gave you the experience of deep love itself, of knowing what it feels like to be fully known by another human being. And even if that love ended, even if it ended badly, the experience of it expanded your capacity. It made you larger. It showed you that you are capable of loving deeply and being loved deeply, and that capacity does not disappear when the relationship does. For some of you, and this is the hardest one, they gave you yourself, in the sense that they're leaving forced to return to the person you had been before the relationship. A person you had, slowly, without fully realizing it, drifted away from. And the grief of losing them became, in time, the homecoming of finding yourself again. None of these gifts were accidents. They were the purpose of the assignment. And in Scripture, we see this pattern clearly. Ruth and Naomi. Naomi lost her husband and both her sons. Every human relationship she had built her life around was gone. And in the rubble of that loss, she found Ruth. And Ruth found Boaz. And from that lineage came David. And from David's lineage came Jesus. What looked like the complete destruction of Naomi's story was, in the economy of God, the opening chapter of the most important story ever told. The ending of your assignment is not the ending of your story. It is the page turn. Reason 3. God was protecting you from a future you could not yet see. Listen closely, because this reason is one that many of you will only fully understand years from now. When you look back from where God is taking you and see clearly, perhaps for the first time, what you were being protected from. But I want you to receive it today, by faith, before the full picture is visible. When God removes a person from your life, or allows a relationship to break beyond repair, He is not only responding to who that person was in the moment you knew them. He is responding to who they were going to become, to where the relationship was heading, to the specific version of your future that would have existed if that connection had continued to its natural trajectory. And He saw something there that He loved you too much to allow. Some of you, if you're truly honest with yourself, can already sense what that something was. The person was heading somewhere that you could not follow without compromising the deepest parts of who you are, without abandoning the faith, without walking away from the calling, without slowly, incrementally giving up the things that make you you in exchange for the maintenance of a relationship that was asking you, piece by piece, to become less. Some of you were protected from a marriage that would have been a slow suffocation. A partnership that looked workable from the outside, but would have quietly extinguished the light in you over decades of minimizing, accommodating, and surrendering the God-given uniqueness that was meant to be expressed, not buried. Some of you were protected from a financial entanglement that would have taken everything you had spent years building. From a loyalty to a person whose path was heading toward a destination that would have cost you your reputation, your peace, your children's inheritance, your own future security. Some of you were protected from simply staying in something comfortable but not right, staying in something familiar but not growing, staying in a version of your life that was good enough but not the fullness of what God had planned. And the breaking, as brutal as it was the only thing powerful enough to move you from the comfortable not quite right into the terrifying but ultimately glorious exactly right. Proverbs 3 verses 5-6, one of the most quoted passages in Scripture and one of the most genuinely difficult to live, says, Proverbs 3 verses 5-6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. Lean not on your own understanding. Your understanding, in the season of the breaking, said, this is wrong. This is too much. This is the worst thing that could have happened. God's understanding said, I can see around the corner you cannot see around. And what is coming for you, if you will trust me through this, is more than you are currently able to imagine. The protection was real. The love behind it was real. And one day, perhaps soon, perhaps in years, you will see around that corner, and you will understand. If you are still with me right now, and I want to acknowledge that you have been on a journey over the last 40 minutes that has required something of you. It has required honesty, vulnerability, the willingness to sit with a pain that is easier to keep moving around than to sit directly inside of. And you're still here. That tells me something about who you are. You are a woman who does not run from the hard thing when the hard thing is the thing that will set her free. We're just past the halfway point of this message. And I want to tell you, what comes next is the part one have been specifically led to deliver today. The part about what God is building in you right now through the healing. The part about who you are becoming on the other side of this breaking. Don't go anywhere. The most important part of this message is still ahead. Reason 4. The breaking was breaking you open, not breaking you down. Pause for a moment. Take a breath. There's a kind of breaking that destroys, and there's a kind of breaking that opens. The breaking that destroys is final. It produces rubble. It leaves nothing usable, nothing redeemable, nothing that can be gathered and rebuilt into something new. It is the kind of breaking that the enemy engineers, designed specifically to leave you unable to function, unable to trust, unable to love, unable to believe that anything whole is still possible for your life. The breaking that opens is different. It is violent, yes. It is painful, yes. It looks from the inside very similar to the kind that destroys. Because in both cases, something that was whole has been shattered. And in the immediate aftermath of the shattering, it is almost impossible to tell the difference. But over time, and this is the test of origin, you can tell them apart by what grows in the space the breaking created. The breaking that destroys produces a closing, a hardening, a progressive narrowing of the life, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, as the person protects themselves against ever being broken again by making themselves smaller, harder, less accessible to the possibility of new love or new faith or new hope. The breaking that opens produces the opposite. It produces, gradually and often through great resistance, an expansion, a depth of compassion that was not present before, an ability to sit with other broken people in their pain without flinching, because you have been in that place and you know its geography, a sensitivity to God's voice that was not present when everything was smooth and comfortable and undisturbed, a capacity for the kind of love that has been refined by loss, and is therefore truer, deeper, less naive, more genuinely selfless than the love that has never been tested. The kind of love that, when it arrives in its right and proper time and form, will be received and given in a way that simply was not possible before the breaking. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it in your spirit with full honesty. Are you more compassionate than you were before that relationship ended? Do you understand the pain of other people more deeply? Do you sit with grieving friends, with people going through divorce, with women who have lost the thing they built their identity around? Do you sit with them differently now, with a presence and a patience and a lack of easy answers that you did not have before your own breaking? For most of you, the answer is yes. That compassion is not incidental. It is not just a byproduct of personal growth. It is a gift that was specifically produced in you by specifically permitted pain, because God knew who you were going to encounter, who was going to need someone who had walked through exactly what you walked through, who was going to need a hand extended to them by someone who knew the floor of that particular valley. Your breaking opened you into your ministry, even if that ministry is never formal, even if it never has a title or a platform or an audience beyond the handful of people God will place in your path who need exactly what your breaking produced. Isaiah 61:3 describes what God does with the broken. And hear these words slowly because they are meant for you. Isaiah 61 verse 3. He gives a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. Ashes. That is the accurate description of what a breaking feels like at its worst. Reduced, gray, weightless, without form or future. But ashes are not the ending in God's economy. Ashes are the starting material. And what he builds from ashes, when you give them to him, is not a reconstruction of what was. It is something entirely new, something more beautiful than the original, something bearing the specific quality that only fire can produce. You are not broken down. You are broken open. And what is coming out of the opening is extraordinary. Reason 5. God was repositioning you for someone or something you could not have reached from where you were. Listen closely to what comes next. God is a God of divine positioning. He is deeply, specifically, intentionally concerned with where you are geographically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, because position determines access. And access determines what you're able to receive, to give, and to become. And sometimes, the reason God allows a relationship to break is not primarily about the relationship at all. It is about the position that relationship was keeping you in. The geographical location, the social circle, the emotional state, the daily routine, the version of your future that was being quietly constructed around the existence of that connection. A future that, had it continued undisturbed, would have taken you further and further from the specific place God needed you to arrive. Some of you, and I want you to receive this with openness because it may feel strange at first, were being held in a city that was not your city, a church community that was not your community, a financial dynamic that was not your financial future, a social circle that was not the circle that carries the people God has assigned to your next season. And the relationship was the thread that held all of those things in place. When a relationship broke, when the thread was cut, everything attached to it became movable. The geography, the community, the routine, the version of the future. All of it suddenly open and unresolved in a way that felt like chaos, but was actually, in God's sovereign engineering, a reconfiguration. He needed you movable. And you weren't movable while that relationship was intact. Think about where you are now compared to where you were when that relationship was the center of your life. Not just physically, though for some of you the physical relocation alone has been significant, but internally, spiritually, in terms of the people you have access to now, the opportunities that have presented themselves, the version of your daily life that has emerged from the rubble of the old one. Is it possible, even slightly, even tentatively, that where you are now is closer to where you were always meant to be than where you were before? For many of you, if you are honest, the answer is more complicated than a simple yes. Because the new position has brought its own challenges, its own unfamiliarity, its own griefs, and you have not yet fully arrived at the destination the repositioning was pointing toward. You're still in transit, but transit is not failure. Transit is movement. And movement, any movement toward the thing God has for you, is the right direction. Even when the movement is uncomfortable, even when the new position feels exposed and uncertain and nothing like the security you left behind. In the book of Ruth, and this story is worth sitting with deeply. Ruth was a Moabite woman, widowed, childless, operating in a culture and a faith tradition that was not originally her own. And she had a choice. She could stay in Moab, familiar, known, surrounded by her own people and her own gods and her own comfortable smallness. Or she could follow Naomi into a foreign land where she knew no one and had no standing and no guarantee of anything. She followed, and in following, in being willing to leave the familiar position for the unknown one, she arrived in a field, Boaz's field, the field of her Redeemer, the field that was the beginning of everything. She could not have reached that field from Moab. The heartbreak moved her, literally, into the position where her future was waiting. Where's your field? Where's the position that God has been engineering your life toward? Through the breaking, through the grief, through the repositioning that you have not yet fully arrived at, but are closer to than you realize. It is there. It is real, and it has your name on it. Reason 6. God was teaching you the difference between what you wanted and what you were created for. Pause for a moment. Take a breath. This reason requires the most honesty, and it is the one that, more than any other, has the potential to completely transform the way you understand not just the specific heartbreak you've been carrying, but every relationship decision you make from this point forward. What you wanted from that person and from that relationship was real. I'm not dismissing it. The longing was genuine. The need behind the longing was genuine. The pain of having it unmet or partially met and then withdrawn was genuine. But what you wanted was not necessarily what you were created for. There's a version of love that we want, and there's a version of love that God designed us for. And these two things are not always the same. In fact, for most of us, the gap between what we want and what we are created for is precisely where the most important spiritual growth of our entire lives takes place. What we want is often shaped by our wounds, by the things we were deprived of in childhood, by the patterns we absorbed from the relationships we observed growing up, by the agreements we made about ourselves and about love based on the earliest experiences we had of both. And those ones are powerful. They are compelling. They arrive with the full force of need and longing and a hunger that feels holy because of how deep it goes. But they're not always wise. And they're not always aligned with what God knows we are created for, which is a love that does not require us to diminish ourselves to receive it. A love that does not activate our deepest wounds and call that activation chemistry. A love that does not ask us to perform or manage or shrink or wait indefinitely for a basic dignity that should be freely given. The person who broke your heart may have given you a version of what you wanted. Enough of it. In the good seasons, in the early seasons, that walking away felt impossible, because mixed into the pain was enough of the longing met that leaving meant giving up the parts that felt like nourishment. And that is one of the most specific and targeted traps the enemy lays for the hearts of women who have a genuine capacity for deep love. Give them enough of what they hunger for to make the cost of leaving feel too high, and keep them tied to something that is producing diminishment. Just enough joy mixed into the pain to make the pain seem like the price of the joy. God looked at that arrangement, at you giving and hoping and adjusting and trying and sometimes receiving and more often not. And he made a decision. Not for my daughter. Not this. She was built for more than this. And the breaking was his intervention. His refusal to watch you spend the years he gave you pouring yourself into something that was never going to fully hold you. 1 Coríntios 13. The Great Love chapter describes what love actually is. 1 Coríntios 13. Patient, kind, not envious, not boastful, not self-seeking, not easily angered, keeping no record of wrongs, always protecting, always trusting, always hoping, always persevering. not as a weapon against the memory of that person, but as a compass for your own heart going forward, as a definition, God's definition, of what love looks like when it is operating in its full, healthy, divinely designed form. Because that is what you were created for. Not a version of it, not an approximation of it, not a love that checks 4 of those boxes and violates the other 6. The whole thing. And God allowed the breaking, in part, so that you would stop accepting less. So that the contrast between what you experienced and what you were created for would become so clear, so undeniable, so viscerally felt that you would never again mistake the counterfeit for the real thing. Your standard was raised by the breaking, even when the breaking felt like it was destroying everything. Your standard was raised. Reason 7. God was preparing the testimony that will set someone else free. Listen closely, because this is the reason that ties everything together. This is the one that gives the entire story, not just the heartbreak, but everything that came before and everything that comes after, a purpose that extends beyond your own life. Your story was never only about you. I want to say that again, because it is one of the most important sentences in this entire message. Your story, the whole of it, including the most painful chapters, was never only about you. God did not permit the breaking simply to produce character in you. He did not allow the pain simply to redirect your path or reposition your life or raise your standards. Though all of those things are real and true, He allowed it because He could see someone, a specific someone, a woman who would one day be exactly where you were, who would carry exactly the grief you carried, who would ask exactly the questions you asked, who would be in exactly the darkness you were in. And He needed someone to reach her, someone who would not offer empty platitudes or pre-packaged spiritual answers from a safe distance. Someone who would sit down next to her in the rubble of her breaking and say, "I know this place. I have been here, and here's what I know about this place that I could not have known any other way." That someone is you. The testimony that is being built in you through this healing. Every layer of it, every hard-won insight, every moment of clarity that came through the confusion, every piece of faith that survived the doubt, all of it is being gathered, stored, kept with a holy intentionality by a God who does not waste experiences the way we waste them. He is building a resource, and the resource is your story, not to be broadcast necessarily, not to be performed or polished into something palatable, but to be available, to be the lived, honest, costly, beautifully imperfect testimony that another woman needs to encounter at exactly the right moment. Maybe that moment is already happening. Maybe you have already, without fully realizing it, reach someone through the small pieces of your story that you have shared, casually in conversation, in a phone call, in a comment on a video like this one. Maybe a word you said to someone going through their own breaking, a word that you spoke from the specific place of knowing, landed in their spirit like a lifeline. You will not always know when it happens, but it happens. And every time it does, every time your broken and healing story reaches into someone else's darkness and brings light, the original breaking is retroactively given a meaning that transcends even the profound personal purposes it served in your own life. Revelation 12, verse 11 says, "They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony." The word of their testimony, not their achievement, not their unbroken perfection, not the version of their life in which nothing went wrong. Their testimony, the story that includes the breaking, the story that carries the weight of real loss and real grief and real questions and real God in the darkness. That story has power that a comfortable, untested faith simply cannot generate, because it was forged in something real, And people in real pain are not reached by performances of ease. They are reached by evidence of someone who has been where they are and found God faithful in that exact place. Your testimony is being completed, not despite the heartbreak, through it. And it is going to reach someone who needs it more than they can currently articulate. That is why God allowed it. Not only for you, for the ones who are coming, the ones whose paths have already been arranged to cross yours at exactly the moment your story has the most to offer them. You're going to look back at this season, at the whole impossible, grief-filled, faith-stretching, identity-reconstructing, purpose-building arc of it, and you're going to understand. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to say with full conviction and full tears and full gratitude. He was working in every moment, even the ones that felt most like silence, even the ones that felt most like abandonment, even the ones where I could not find him. He was working. He is working now. The healing framework. Before I close this message, I want to give you something practical, because understanding why God allowed the heartbreak is only the beginning. The work of healing, the daily, unglamorous, deeply sacred work of moving from the understanding to the actual freedom, requires more than insight. It requires practice. So here are 3 things I want to leave in your hands today. The first is permission. Permission to grieve fully and without apology. Because one of the most spiritually harmful things we do to ourselves is rush the grief. We tell ourselves that if we really believed God was working all things for good, we wouldn't still be hurting. That our continued pain is evidence of inadequate faith. That spiritual maturity means the smile comes easily and the tears stop quickly. That is not scripture. That is performance. Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus, knowing full well he was about to raise him. He did not skip the grief because he knew the resurrection was coming. He honored the grief. He sat inside it. He let it be real. Give yourself permission to let it be real. The healing does not require you to pretend it didn't hurt. It requires you to let the one who permitted the hurt walk you all the way through it, not around it. The second is release, not a one-time release, though there may be a significant moment of intentional surrender, but a daily, ongoing practice of releasing the narrative, the story you have built around the heartbreak, the case you've been building consciously or unconsciously for what it means about you, about love, about God, about what is still possible for your life. Every morning, before the narrative has a chance to reconstruct itself, give it back. Lord, I release the story I have been telling about this. I release what I decided it meant. I receive what you say it means instead. The third is expectation. Actively, deliberately, faithfully held expectation that what God is building in you through this season is going somewhere. That the breaking was not the destination. That the healing is not the destination. That both of them are preparation for a chapter that has not yet been written. A chapter that your natural mind cannot yet fully imagine because it is going to be bigger than what your current experience makes possible to expect. Hold the expectation. Not anxiously, not desperately, but steadily, quietly, with the deep, grounded, unshakable confidence of someone who has discovered, through the very hardest kind of experience, that God is faithful. He has been faithful. He is faithful now, and he will be faithful in everything that is coming. The shift prediction. I want to speak to the next 48 to 72 hours very specifically. Something is shifting right now in the atmosphere of your healing. I believe that for many of you, this message is going to mark a before and an after. Not the before and after of the heartbreak, but a new dividing line. The moment when the narrative began to change. When the meaning of the breaking began to come into focus in a way that it hadn't before. In the next 3 days, you're going to encounter something that confirms this shift. It may come in the form of a scripture that lands differently than it ever has before, as if you were reading it for the first time, though you have read it 100 times. It may come in the form of a conversation, something someone says to you casually and without knowing the significance, that answers a question you've been carrying for months. It may come in the quiet, in a moment of prayer or stillness where the heaviness that has been your constant companion for this season simply shifts. Not completely, not all at once, but noticeably, undeniably, enough that something in you says, something just moved. Pay attention to that moment. Is God confirming what this message planted? And for some of you, for the ones who have been holding a closed heart because the pain of the last opening was too great, I want to say this very gently and very directly. The door of your heart is safe to open again, not recklessly, not without wisdom, not without the discernment that this season has produced in you, but safely, because the God who allowed the breaking is also the God who heals the wound. And a healed heart is not a heart that never loved again. It is a heart that loves better, more wisely, more freely, more fully aligned with the design of the one who created love itself. The next chapter is not a repeat of the last one. It is something entirely new, and it is already being written. If this message found you today, if it reached the place in you where the heartbreak has been living, if even one moment in this message gave language to something you have felt but never been able to name, then I want you to do something right now. Go to the comments and type 999. 999 is the number of completion, of divine endings that carry divine beginnings inside them. It is your declaration that you receive the truth of this message, that the breaking was purposeful, that the healing is real, and that what God is building in you through this is not finished, not even close. And then, beneath your 999, I want you to write one sentence. Just one. Finish this sentence in the comments. Because of that heartbreak, I now know. Because of that heartbreak, I now know my own strength. Because of that heartbreak, I now know what I deserve. Because of that heartbreak, I now know God's faithfulness in the dark. Because of that heartbreak, I now know who I really am. Whatever your sentence is, write it. Because the woman who was sent to receive this message today needs to read what you write. In your one sentence, your specific, honest, hard-won one sentence may be the exact word that gives her permission to believe that her breaking is not the ending either. We are in this together. Every single one of us who has ever loved deeply and lost painfully and found God faithful in the rubble. We are in this together. If this message blessed you today, if it gave you something to carry differently into the rest of this week, please share it with a woman who is currently in the middle of her breaking and cannot yet see the purpose. Because sometimes the most divine thing we can do for another soul is hand them the mirror at exactly the right moment. You were guided here today. The heartbreak was not the end of your story. It was the turning of the page. And what God writes next, what He is already writing, is more than you have yet dared to hope for. I will see you in the next message. And until then, let Him heal what He allowed. Completely. Without apology. Without rush. You are worth the full healing. You always have been. White heart.